Thank you. Maura Forrest, Globe and Mail. Premier, you talked a lot about forging connections with Quebec. You obviously and the Quebec Premier are both looking toward votes that will have a lot to do with sovereignty. You say you want Canada to remain united. The Quebec Premier says she does not want a third referendum here in Quebec. How similar are your jobs right now, and what suggestions or advice do you have for the Quebec Premier as she looks toward the vote in Quebec this fall?
Well, I've learned something about language in Quebec. Quebec uses the term autonomy and uses sovereignty to mean something different. So I think we are aligned that autonomy is the goal in ensuring that the provinces have control over their areas of jurisdiction. In my province, it's a little bit different because we have a citizen initiative process where the people can ask for a referendum question. And as I mentioned in my comments, 400,000 people signed one petition, 300,000 signed another, which is why that's been put forward. But my view is that we've got to give Albertans hope again that Canada can work. It didn't work very well for Alberta for 10 years. And now with the MOU that I signed with the Prime Minister, with the fact that I do trade missions like this to Quebec to build ties with other premiers. This is, I think, a new opportunity for us to renew our federation, renew those ties, expand the work that we can do, trading with each other, opening up new markets, and that's, I think, the spirit that I was approaching my visit now, and I think that Madame Frechette was looking forward to meeting her a little bit later to talk about the ways we can work together.
And I wanted to ask you also about this east-west energy corridor that Premier Frechette mentioned earlier this week. You mentioned it today. What exactly are we talking about here? Are we talking about natural gas, for one thing? And how serious are any conversations around the possibility of an east-west energy corridor? What conversations have you had?
Well, my understanding is that Quebec is going through a consultation process with its people about what the energy mix should look like for the next 25 years. I don't think that work is complete. But having no doubt the question on the table that Prime Minister Mark Carney has put on about, and the challenge about the only way to meet the challenge of the future with AI data centers and AI-driven manufacturing is through natural gas being a component of the power grid. That's going to be a conversation that I'll be watching with interest to see how Quebec resolves on that. Because if Quebec is interested in developing its own natural gas resources, we stand by, ready to assist. We have expertise in that ourselves, and we think it would be a wonderful partnership to do that. But I think when you're looking at the energy corridor right now, most of us are talking in terms of moving electricity and building interties. In Quebec, most of the electricity is done by hydro. In Ontario, most of it, 60%, is nuclear. In my province, most of it is natural gas. And so, but creating those interties so that we can move that power to where it's needed, I think is really at the start of ensuring that everybody has the power that they need to grow at affordable prices. So that's, I think, the beginning step, but it may turn into more. In Western Canada, we're having a different conversation. We have our ports to ports to port strategy, where we're talking about Vancouver, Prince Rupert, Grays Bay, and a port in Hudson Bay as being an opportunity for us to develop a comprehensive economic corridor with all products. We haven't advanced those conversations yet into Ontario and Quebec, but if there's an appetite to have that conversation, we certainly will be interested in having that too.
Thank you.
Good day, Premier Smith. Marie-Michelle Sioui from Le Devoir. Back home in Alberta, what would it take for you to recognize a winning referendum? Is 50% plus one a clear enough majority for you?
Well, as you may know, that this is not a non-binding vote. The two options are on the ballot are, do you want to remain in Canada? That's what I'll be voting for. Option two is, or do you want to start the legal process to have a binding referendum? And so I'm really hopeful that I will be able to convince the vast majority of Albertans to vote with me to remain in Canada, and that they'll give me a mandate on the other 9 questions I'm putting on the ballot, which is to emulate Quebec a little bit by taking more control over immigration, having more authority in our areas of provincial jurisdiction. We're talking about reforms for the judiciary and the Senate. Those are the things that I'll be advocating on, but this is really just a testing of the waters based on the citizen initiative that was asked for by our people.
But to go back to the question I asked, if 50% plus one of the people say that they do want to go forward with a referendum. Are you going to accept that result and
Well,
go
as
forward?
I said, because the next stage would be perhaps a Clarity Act question, perhaps that Indigenous consultation, and ultimately a second vote, that would be the direction that I would take, yes. But there's an opportunity to avoid that, and that would be to vote to remain, which is what I'm encouraging Albertans to do.
And speaking of that, we've seen Stephen Harper, Preston Manning, Jason Kenney, they're all arguing for Alberta to stay inside Canada. Are you arguing strongly enough yourself? Why are those people stepping up?
Well, I can tell you that I'm here in Quebec arguing that. I've hosted Scott Moe as Premier, I've hosted Doug Ford as Premier, I've hosted Tim Houston. I've hosted Blaine Higgs. I will be hosting the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. I just hosted the Western Premiers. This is what you do when you're trying to build a country, is you talk to your counterparts and you find ways that you can work together on policy and you find ways that you can trade together. So I think I'm doing a lot, and I'm going to keep on doing more.
You talk about improving things with Ottawa, starting your jurisdiction, that sort of thing. How much do you see that leverage is coming from this talk of a referendum, if at all, and capturing the attention of Ottawa?
Well, I talked to the Prime Minister when he first came in, and I said, we have a very serious problem, that the separatist sentiment had risen as high as 42%. And I said to him, work with me on trying to find a way to bring that down, so that we can work together on addressing some of the issues that are causing that sentiment to be so high. And part of the reason that sentiment was so high is what I called the 9 bad laws. Laws that had emissions caps, that would mean we couldn't produce any more oil and gas, and we'd actually have to start phasing it out. Net zero power regulations, meaning we wouldn't be able to add any more electricity to our power grid. Greenwashing laws that would have put our corporate citizens in jail if they talked about their emissions reduction policy, net zero cars. I mean, the list goes on. And so the Prime Minister addressed 8 of the 9 bad laws that I was concerned about. There's still some work we need to do on plastics. But I think that is the kind of goodwill that he and I need to work on. If there's discontent in the country where people have given up hope, it's our job collectively to give them that hope, and that's what he and I have been working on. We've got a little bit more work to do to convince a few more people, but I'm going to keep on working on those issues. You don't solve the issues by ignoring them. You have to address them. You have to identify them, and then you have to work to resolve them.
So, if I understand you correctly, are you saying that this referendum initiative, which you don't support, has helped you get concessions from Ottawa?
No, that's not what I said. I said that there were legitimate issues in Alberta that caused people to lose hope in Canada, and the Prime Minister and I together decided that we were going to work to address them, and that's what the MOU ended up coming up with. He clearly made some concessions, we made some concessions, but that's how Confederation works. You don't get 100% of what you want, but the Prime Minister and I were interested in a win-win, and I think we got that.
Thank you.
Hi there, Geneviève Beauchemin from CTV News. Hi, Premier. Are there any lessons that you're looking at from past referendums here in Quebec, where there are, from the argument side of people arguing against a referendum, people arguing against separation, that you're taking to your own battle here in Alberta?
I'm looking more at what I saw in the UK. I came back from the United Kingdom, and there's a lot of regret. I think you're seeing that now, that the new Prime Minister is talking about ways to expand the trade relationship with Europe, and it's complicated and difficult. And you talk to many people who were Brexiters who said, you know what, it didn't turn out like I'd hoped it would, and I have regret. So those are some of the arguments that I'm paying attention to, and it's part of the reason why we're going to make sure that we make the strongest case possible for a renewed Confederation. I think we have to be very clear that the people of my province are very upset with the way we've been treated for the last 10 years. The example I gave in my speech was, imagine if an Alberta politician had come here and tried to shut down your hydroelectric business and say you couldn't develop your aluminum industry anymore. That's what Stephen Guilbeault did to our province, and that's the reason why people are so frustrated and why they lost hope. It cost jobs, it cost economic growth, it cost us our ability to generate revenues to pay for the things that we care about, and we're now reversing that. And that's the key, is that I think there's a recognition that we can't keep going the way we were going. We don't want the next 10 years to be the same as the last 10 years, and it takes some time to win the hearts and minds of people, but I think everybody is committed to trying to do that, and I'm grateful for it.
Can I ask you about the manufacturing capacity?
Yeah.
I think I heard you say to Quebec, if you build it, we'll buy it. And
Yes.
tell me about just what kind of future you envisage in terms of that sort of commercial relationship.
Well, I discovered that Siemens already has manufacturing here, and they manufacture products for TC Energy, which is one of our major pipelines. And Siemens is one of the foremost manufacturers of natural gas turbines. So I think Quebec already has an in potentially being able to expand that product offering. But that's not the only thing. Just going to Port of Quebec, we saw, of course, that product from Montreal was coming up here, either refined product or oil to be refined. We know that Glencore moves a bunch of our grains. We know as well that AI data centers on Quebec already has a toehold and a head start on the issue of data centers, and collaboration that we can do with Mila and Amy, which is our two of our three foremost AI data center research laboratories. And so I think that there's an immense opportunity for us to return to the kind of relationship that we had, where we have products that we can produce because we've got a natural advantage. We can ship them to Quebec. Quebec can manufacture, and then we can buy them back. And that is, I think, something that got disrupted perhaps in recent years. I think we all got focused on north-south, and now we should be focusing more on east-west. And I think that there's going to be an incredible partnership we can have.
Jose Lagonière from TVA. In a scenario that Alberta separate eventually, is it important for you to know in advance if Quebec would acknowledge the Alberta sovereignty?
As I mentioned, I'm fighting for the Remain side on that vote. And it is a question about whether we should have a question on a binding motion. So my job right now is to give Albertans hope and to give them an alternative. And the alternative is to give me a mandate to pursue more measures to increase our autonomy, similar to what Quebec has done. Quebec has a Quebec-Canada agreement from 1991 on immigration. We should look at doing that. We've also replicated some of the legislation that Quebec has about provincial priorities and making sure the federal government has to work with our provincial government, about making sure that when international agreements are signed, they have to be affirmed by our legislature. Those are things that Quebec has already done within a united Canada, and so we think that those are the kind of things that Albertans would like to see as well, and that's what I'm working on.
What if it's happened?
Sorry?
If it's happened one day?
Well, it's my job to avoid that from happening. It's my job to convince Albertans to have hope again. But just to be clear, the vote on October 19th is a vote to remain or to start the process towards a binding referendum. It's not a binding referendum.
I know. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Thank you. I think I see 3 or 4 left in the queue here. We should have time to finish off all of you.
Kevin Doherty, Quebec Chronicle Telegraph. What lessons can Alberta learn about autonomy and partnership? This is what Quebec is talking about now with Ottawa. You know, we had the agreement yesterday, for instance, on financing, $10 billion agreement. Can Alberta learn something from this?
Yeah, I think that the Premier is, and the whole position of the CAQ government, because it's been in for some time, then we've been watching it for some time. But what I notice about the relationship between Canada and Quebec is there's a very strong relationship between the Premier and the Prime Minister, and it's one of mutual respect. And I think that the rest of the provinces are asking for that same thing, is don't come into Alberta and try to work with individual mayors and try to split and divide people and try to fund different agencies with different priorities for the province. Quebec has put in measures in place to make sure that doesn't happen. And we're replicating those measures in Alberta, and I think it will lead to a more constructive partnership. And so the MOU is the first example of that. We also have an affordable housing agreement that we came up with the federal government as well, which is another example of that. And we're involved in our own discussions around joint projects we can fund for the infrastructure investment, similar to what Madame Frechette announced yesterday. So yes, I think that she and I are both of the same mind when it comes to what autonomy looks like, but what cooperative federalism looks like as well.
Yeah. Alberta has a lot of oil and gas, fossil fuels, as we say, and there's a push towards, there's an argument on climate change, which in Quebec is pretty strong, I would say. I'm just wondering how, I mean, and we talk about carbon capture and storage, but is there a and on the other hand, we wouldn't want to have those stranded assets, you know, you have now, if you just say stop developing it, you strand those assets, and that's wealth, right? So is there a way to develop those assets and deal with climate change?
Well, I think there is, and that's why we're looking at carbon capture, utilization, and storage as one. We're looking at direct air capture too. A Quebec company, Deep Sky, it has a demonstration project in central Alberta on how to capture CO2 from the atmosphere. We also have geothermal as a potential to decarbonize, and we are looking at small modular reactors as well as a potential to decarbonize. Some of those take a little bit longer, and I think all of those technologies are going to be necessary into the future. But I think that there's a reality that if we're going to fuel manufacturing and fuel the development of AI, you need reliable power, you need power to come on stream quickly, and the only way to do that is through natural gas. So I think that's part of the reason why the Prime Minister made the revisions that he did to electricity policy a few weeks ago that were referenced, is that these things have to happen together. That the conversation internationally is talking about a global energy addition, that we are all going to need more power. We're going to need to have 5 billion people on the planet come up to our same standard of living. That requires power. And there's going to be all power from all sources that is going to be needed. So it's a conversation you've just begun in Quebec. I'm watching with great interest. Happy to assist if Quebec decides to develop its own natural gas resources. But again, I think that's a conversation that Quebec needs to have. We have a different conversation in Alberta because 90% of our electricity comes from natural gas. And we export 5 million barrels a day of oil, and we want to double both of those. And so we're looking at markets to the south in the United States, to the east in Asia, and potentially as well out of Hudson Bay through the Port of Churchill or one of the other Hudson Bay ports. That's the conversation we're having in the West, and if Quebec wants to have that conversation with us, we remain open to it.
You didn't mention Energy East.
I think that decision was made years ago, and as I say, if Quebec wants to restart that conversation, we're open to it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Good afternoon, Premier. Patrice Bergeron, the Canadian Press, la presse canadienne. Apart from trade barriers that we were talking about earlier, is there any other obstacles you see in the relationship between Quebec and Alberta?
Not obstacles so much. It is, we are by and large an English-speaking province. There are some pockets where we do have Francophone speakers, native Francophone speakers. We support the Francophone language through not only immersion, but also Francophone school boards. And so we're doing our part to support minority language, but sometimes not speaking the same language can be a bit of a barrier. I hope it's not one in the future. I found everybody here was very accommodating of my ability to only speak English. But there are different rules in Quebec that we recognize. That's the only one that I see potentially being having a few more hurdles for the true integration.
Is social acceptance for the kind of the projects that you promote is an issue, you think, in Quebec, because there's maybe a gap in the public opinion between what Albertans may believe and what public opinion in Quebec may believe?
I think that because Quebec has been able to get to this point all of its power from hydroelectric, I think there's sort of an expectation on the part of your people that it's going to be able to be 100% hydroelectric going into the future, regardless of power needs. And there's always limitations to being able to get projects of that scale on stream. There's limitations to the amount of growth. There's limitations to how fast that can occur. And so I think that Stéphane Marlion made a very good point, is if you want to restore your manufacturing base and you want AI to be driving that, then there's going to have to be a broader conversation about other power sources, and natural gas is the option. But that's me. That's not just me saying that. That's I think one of the foremost economists in the country saying that as well. But that's the conversation that Quebecers are having right now, and I look forward to the outcome with interest.
Merci.
Yep.
And it looks like just one more, so we'll take you and finish
Bonjour.
off.
So do you hope that Quebec will approve a new gas pipeline from Alberta, like the one that is proposed by Marinvest?
Yeah, I mean, if there was a possibility for us to restart that conversation, I'd be open to it. One of the things that we found in having that conversation with British Columbia is that our initial plans to build an oil pipeline chose a port that was probably not the right port for a variety of different reasons. And so with that feedback, we started looking at 5 or 6 different ports that might be better. If there is an appetite for Quebec to have that conversation, maybe that's where we begin. Did the previous projects choose the right place? And if not, is there a better place that we can look at? But I think that those are conversations that happen between politicians, but everybody has to be sensitive to what their population is prepared for. And I think that we're maybe a little bit more advanced in that conversation and how we can work together in Western Canada, but we're just beginning to see all of the ways in which Quebec and Alberta can work together. We already have lots of other things that we can work on together. As you may know, Alberta oil already comes to Quebec by way of Line 9, and then it gets put into a tanker and comes up to Quebec. It's part of the reason why I'm going to be able to fly home today, because aviation fuel from Alberta processed here is going to fill the plane that gets me back to my province. And that is, to me, an example of a perfect kind of partnership. And so maybe we need to talk more about what we're already doing, but I think that that is a demonstration that we have long, enduring relationships and we can always build on them.
Merci.
Yeah.
Thank you. That'll
everyone.
conclude our veil.